welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be using our scraps from last week's video to make a super fun coordinating project this week, so stay tuned. So in today's video, we're going to be making this coordinating pillow for the fun quilt that we made last week. We're going to be using all of our scraps from that project, plus we're going to be using some fun background fabric, and then I even used scraps for the binding of this project. So it's super fun, and I feel really good about it because we're using up all of our leftover scraps to make a completely new project. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and get started sewing. So supplies for this project are really easy, and I will put all the exact cutting instructions in the description box below the video. We're going to be using some of our white leftover sashing, and if you didn't use the Jelly Roll Jamboree Quilt, you can use 4 8.5-inch square blocks, but we're going to use our 4 leftover blocks from our Jelly Roll Jamboree Quilt, and I will link that up here in the top corner as well. You'll also need some backing fabric, and I'm also using some scraps from my borders. Of course, you're going to need some regular sewing supplies. You'll also need some batting, and I just use warm and white batting, and then I also like to use this 505 adhesive spray. Next, we're going to arrange our blocks, and we're going to just be turning our blocks in opposite directions, so you'll have one going horizontal and one going vertical, and we're just going to arrange them however looks pleasing to you. So this looks okay to me. Next, we're going to take 2 of our sashing pieces, and these are 1.5 by 8.5-inch strips. We're just going to sew that top and bottom row together just like this using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. I'm just quickly going to press those little sashing strips, and I just like to press them and then push them open, so I'm just pressing towards the sashing strips. For this particular block, it doesn't actually matter which direction you press your seams. You can do whatever you prefer. Next, we're going to take these right side blocks, and we're just going to place them on top of the left side blocks and just sew those together again using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, we're going to press these, and I just like to press these toward the sashing strip because there just aren't any seams on there, and so it just presses nice and flat. I typically press towards the dark when I'm quilting or towards the easiest way with the least amount of seams. So now that we have our top and bottom rows done, we're going to add a piece of sashing strip between the rows. We're also going to add one at the top, and I'm going to add one at the bottom as well. Again, sew all 3 using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And here they are. I've just pressed my block. I also just realized that I sewed my squares going the wrong way, so just make sure that your squares are all alternating directions. Next, we're going to add our sashing strips to the right and left side, and this will complete our pillow quilt top. And then next I'm going to go ahead and take a piece of batting, and I'm just going to layer my pillow top on top of it, and then I'm going to be using this 505 adhesive spray to attach it down. This is exactly how I do my large quilts as well. You can pin baste if you prefer, so use whatever method you like. And I just pull it back, and you can spray either the fabric or the batting. It doesn't really matter, and I'm just putting a little bit of spray on there and then smoothing it out, and that's just going to hold it in place for when we quilt our pillow top. Now that our pillow top is basted, we can take this over to our machine and we can quilt it, and you can do whatever you like. You can do free motion quilting on here, you can do straight line quilting. I'm probably going to quilt right along these seams, so maybe a 1/4 of an inch away from each of my seams. I think that'll really accentuate the pattern that we have going on here. But one thing I want to mention is if you have, maybe your seams aren't quite straight, or your binding or your sashing isn't straight, if you do a meandering or kind of free motion quilt pattern, that'll hide some of those inconsistencies. If you have nice straight blocks, then feel free to straight line quilt it. It'll really accentuate those quilt blocks nicely. And then I'm just going to clip off all of my little extra threads here. Next, I'm going to square up the pillow, and you're going to want to square this up to about 19.5 by 19.5, and I'm just using my ruler to square these up so I have nice straight edges. Next, we're going to prepare our backing, so you should have 2 pieces of backing that measure 19.5 by 26. We're going to fold those in half, wrong sides together, so that they are 19.5 inches tall by 13 inches wide. And then I'm just going to press this seam right here, or this fold, and then I'm going to run a top stitch along that fold as well. And that's just going to kind of finish off that folded edge and just make it look a lot nicer. And so we're going to repeat that on the other piece as well. So you're just going to want to press those and then run a top stitch down both of those folded edges. On this one, I decided to do one about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge and then another one about 1 inch away, but you can do whatever you prefer. Now there's two ways you can finish this. If you don't want to put binding on, you can do it what I'm showing here. So put your pillow top right side up and then layer your backing pieces so that the raw edges are lined up with the raw edges of the pillow and the folded edges are going towards the center of the pillow. They'll be overlapping by about 6 or so inches. You can sew all the way around all 4 edges of this and then turn your pillow right side out and you'll be all done. The second option is to add binding, which is what we're going to do today. So instead of having your pillow top right side up, we're going to place our pillow top right side down. Again, we're going to put that folded edge going towards the center and line up the raw edges around the outside raw edges of the pillow and repeat with the other backing piece. So again, raw edges lining up with raw edges of the pillow. Next, I'm going to clip all the layers together just so they don't slide around on me. And then I'll take this over to my sewing machine and sew around all 4 edges using about 1/4 to maybe 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. When I get to the first corner, I'm going to leave my needle in the down position, raise my presser foot, pivot my pillow, put my presser foot back down, and just keep on sewing. Here we have our almost completed pillow top. The last step is to add some binding. And I'm actually just going to use some leftover pieces from my borders from my Jelly Roll Jamboree Quilt. I've cut them to 2 1/4 inches wide by however long they were. And now I'm just going to place them right sides together and sew them together using 1/4 inch seam allowance so that I have one continuous strip of binding. I like making my binding scrappy like this because I think it makes it extra cute and we're using up all those leftover scraps. Next, we're going to press those seams open and then I will fold my binding in half, wrong sides together, and press that as well so I have a binding strip ready to go. Next, I'm going to place the binding on the top of the pillow and I'm going to place it about halfway down, but I'm going to start stitching only about a couple inches away from that first corner. That way I have that little flap free, and that's what's going to be handy when we make it all the way back around to join our binding. When I get to the first corner, I'm going to stop 1/4 of an inch away from the corner. I'm going to lift up my presser foot and just turn about a 45-degree angle and just back stitch a couple times to secure it, and then I'm going to cut my thread. And then we're going to turn our pillow to the left like this. I'm going to place my finger right here and pull the binding so it's straight up. That'll help me make sure that my raw edges are lined up. And then I'm going to pull it back towards myself. So again, the raw edges are still lined up, but now we've got this little flap up here in the corner and we're going to go ahead and just keep on sewing. We're going to repeat that process on all 4 corners. And if you need more help binding, I do have a video tutorial on how to bind. I will leave that in the description box below this video. I do go a little bit slower in that video and walk you through step by step. So now we have our binding finished and now we just need to cut it. So I'm laying it down nice and flat and I'm just overlapping it by 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to mark that 1/4 of an inch mark on the binding and then just trim it off right there. And then next we're going to just fold those together so that the right sides are together, and just make sure you don't twist your binding at this stage. So the folded edges are together and the raw edges are together. And then you can open up that binding. I find it's easier to just kind of fold the pillow in half so you don't have tension on the binding. Then go ahead and fold them open so they are right sides together. Take that to your sewing machine and sew along that edge using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And then I'm just going to finger press that seam open. I don't iron this one at this point. I find that finger pressing is just fine. And then when you open your pillow top, like you'll see here, that binding should lay nice and straight. If it's twisted or anything, just seam rip it and make sure that you have it straight and re-sew it. So no harm done. And then we're going to go ahead and just finish adding that piece to our pillow. Once our binding is sewn on the front, we're just going to flip our pillow over and pull that binding out. And you can press this if you like. I don't bother pressing at this step. I just go ahead and fold it over, but you can do whatever you prefer. And then we're going to stitch it onto the back. You can also hand bind it if you like. I do have a tutorial on how to add binding to a quilt, machine or hand, so you can definitely reference that. I'm just going to machine stitch it on, and I am using a 1/8 inch seam allowance here. Now when I get to the first corner, I'm just going to pull up the bottom and then fold over that side, and it just makes that nice mitered corner. And I apologize, my fingers are in the way here, but you just need to hang on to it really well so that it doesn't come open. And then I just take one stitch into that right piece binding, lift up my presser foot, twist it, and keep going. And then I'm just going to repeat that process on all of the remaining corners until I make it all the way around our pillow top. And here's Jax helping me out as usual. Here's our finished pillow top. You can give it one last press if you like. This is also washable. I'm going to stuff it with a 20 by 20 insert and we'll be all set. All right, guys, that is it for today's project. I hope you enjoyed it. And by the way, you can use this same technique to make a pillow out of pretty much any quilt block that you like. You can make your quilt block and then just add borders to make it whatever size you need for the pillow that you want, and then use the same technique for the backing and binding, and you're good to go. So I hope you enjoyed today's project. If you did, please make sure to thumbs up and subscribe. That really helps me out, keeps me encouraged, you know, to make new videos for you guys. So if you enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time.